I was staring at the stack of sources we have for today, and it really hit me how much of our mental image of this guy is just wrong. Like when you picture Napoleon Bonaparte, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
Oh, it's the hand in the waistcoat, the big hat.
And let's be honest, a short, angry little guy stomping around Europe. The whole Napoleon complex, right?
It is the single most enduring image of him, without a doubt. And it's fascinating because it's the first thing we have to completely dismantle if we actually want to understand who he was.
Right, because looking at the biometric data here and the research, the short man thing is basically the 19th century version of fake news.
It really is. It's a masterclass in British propaganda that has lasted, 200 years now? In reality, Napoleon was about 5'7", maybe pushing 5'8".
Which for the time was?
Actually slightly above average for a French male in the late 1700s.
So where does the tiny tyrant myth even come from then?
It came from two distinct places. First, there was a translation error or maybe a deliberate misinterpretation. The French used a different measurement system than the British. A French foot, the pied droit, was actually longer than a British foot. So when his autopsy recorded his height as 5'2", that was in French units.
And in British units,
about 5'7". But the British press just saw the number 5'2" and they just ran with it. It was too good a story to check.
And I imagine the visuals didn't help him either.
Not at all. He was constantly surrounded by his imperial guard, the old guard. These guys were giants. Absolute units. They were handpicked for their height and intimidation factor, and then they wore these massive bearskin hats on top of that.
Right, so you put a 5'7" guy next to a bunch of 6'4" grenadiers.
He's gonna look diminutive.
Yeah.
And the British caricaturist James Gilray, he took that contrast and he just weaponized it. He started drawing little Boney as this tiny, tantrum-throwing toddler in huge boots, and that image just stuck.
It's incredible how a meme from 1803 can define how we see a historical figure today.
It really is.
But okay, let's strip away the height myth. When we do that, we aren't left with a small man. We are left with a figure who is massive. I mean, looking at the research, the scope of his ambition is terrifying. We're talking about a guy who didn't just conquer territory. He redrew the map of Europe, he rewrote the laws that half the world still uses, and he basically invented the concept of modern nationalism.
And that is the mission for this deep dive. We aren't just going to list battles and dates. We need to unpack the life of Napoleon as a case study in raw ambition.
Exactly.
How does a minor noble from a rugged backwater island like Corsica become the absolute master of Europe? And perhaps more importantly, how does someone with that much intellect and power end up dying alone on a damp rock in the middle of the Atlantic?
It is a Shakespearean arc, and to understand it, we have to start at the very beginning, which, surprisingly, isn't even in France.
No, it's not. And this is the first crucial key to his psychology. He was born Napoleone di Bonaparte in Ajaccio, Corsica in 1769. Now look at the timeline in the notes.
Yeah, I see this. France acquired Corsica from the Republic of Genoa in 1768.
Just 1 year before he was born. So legally, he is born a French citizen. But culturally, he is 100% Italian.
So everything about his upbringing is Italian.
Completely. His family was minor Italian nobility. They spoke a Corsican dialect of Italian at home. He didn't even speak French until he was sent off to a military school in France at age 9.
That's a rough age to be dropped into a foreign country where you don't speak the language. And from what I'm reading, he wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms.
It was brutal for him. When he gets to the military academy at Brienne, he is the ultimate outsider. He's relatively poor compared to the high French aristocrats who are there.
Right.
He has a thick, strange accent that makes him sound like a peasant to their ears. And he's fiercely patriotic for Corsica, not France. He viewed the French as occupiers of his homeland. He was teased relentlessly.
Which I think is where we see the first spark of his drive.
Yeah.
The sources mention he didn't try to fit in socially. He just retreated into books. He didn't get mad. He got smart.
He became a voracious reader. And look at what he's reading. He's not reading light fiction. He's reading Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans.
Oh, classics.
He's obsessing over Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar. He's reading Rousseau and the Enlightenment philosophers. He is spending his teenage years living in his head, constructing a world where he's one of these great men of history. He's building a database of how to conquer the world before he even has a command.
But there's a detail here that genuinely surprised me. He wasn't just reading military strategy, he was writing. And not about cannons.
No. At age 26, the man who would conquer Europe wrote a romantic novella. It was called Clisson et Eugénie.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
The Napoleon Bonaparte wrote fan fiction about himself.
Essentially, yes. It's a very sentimental, melodramatic story about a tragic soldier and his love. It's not great literature.
I can imagine.
But it's important because it shows a side of him that gets buried later under the armor. He was deeply emotional, almost romantic in the 19th century sense. He felt things intensely.
And in those early years, his passion was directed entirely at Corsican independence.
100%. He worshipped Pasquale Paoli, the Corsican resistance leader. He saw the French as conquerors.
So he starts out hating the French as occupiers. It's so ironic that he later becomes the personification of France itself. What changes? How does he go from get out of my country to I am the emperor of this country?
The French Revolution. This is the catalyst. We cannot understand Napoleon without the chaos of 1789.
It created a power vacuum.
A massive one. Under the old monarchy, there was a glass ceiling. Napoleon was minor nobility, sure, but he wasn't high nobility. He could never have risen above a certain rank.
He would have been a retired artillery major at best, probably writing more sad romance novels.
Exactly. But the revolution comes along and smashes that glass ceiling. Suddenly, the aristocrats are fleeing the country or, getting their heads chopped off. The officer corps is decimated.
And the revolution introduces this idea of careers open to talent.
Meritocracy, if you can do the job, you get the rank. And Napoleon. He could do the job better than anyone.
And he steps in loudly. We have to talk about the Siege of Toulon in 1793. This seems to be his startup moment, his proof of concept.
It is. Toulon is a vital port in the south, and it's been taken over by British and Royalist forces. The French Republican Army is just stuck. They can't take the city.
So what does he do?
Napoleon is just a 24-year-old captain of artillery at this point, but he looks at the map and sees something the generals missed. He spots a geographical weakness, a specific fort called L'Aiguillette overlooking the harbor.
So it's not about charging the walls, it's about strategy.
No, it's about geometry. He argues that if they can take that point, his guns can dominate the harbor. He can rain fire down on the British ships. If the ships leave, the city falls. It's simple, but brilliant.
And he basically ignores the chain of command to get this done, right?
He annoys everyone until they listen. But he's right. They take the fort, he positions the cannons, the British fleet panics and leaves, and the city falls. In the span of a few months, he jumps from captain to brigadier general.
24 years old and a general. I was barely figuring out how to file my own taxes at 24.
It's absurd, but he proves it wasn't a fluke. 2 years later, he's in Paris, and the government, the Directory, is threatened by a royalist mob.
Right.
They ask Napoleon for help. This is the famous whiff of grape shot incident.
Can we pause on grape shot for a second? Because whiff of grape shot sounds almost poetic, like a whiff of perfume. But technically, it's horrific.
It is. It's essentially turning a cannon into a giant shotgun. Instead of a solid ball, you pack the cannon with canvas bags filled with musket balls or scrap metal.
Oh, wow.
When you fire it, the casing disintegrates and it sprays metal at high velocity. When you fire that into a tightly packed street crowd, the effect is devastating. It shreds people.
He just did it.
He didn't hesitate. He mowed down the mob on the steps of the Church of St. Roch. It was brutal, but it saved the government.
And that brutality buys him his dream job, command of the Army of Italy. And reading about this campaign, this is where the legend really kicks off, isn't it?
This is the startup going IPO.
Yep.
He takes this army that is ragged, starving, unpaid, and literally barefoot, and he transforms them. He gives them speeches that electrify them. He tells them, I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. Rich provinces, great cities will be in your power. He appeals to their greed and their glory.
And then he moves them faster than anyone thought possible.
That was his secret sauce, mobility. European armies at the time were so slow, they dragged massive supply trains behind them.
And he just didn't.
He cut the tail. He told his men to live off the land, which is a polite way of saying steal food from the Italian peasants. But it meant he could march 20, 30 miles a day, while the Austrians were doing 10. He was constantly flanking them, appearing where they didn't expect him.
There's that moment at the Bridge of Arcole. The sources describe him grabbing a flag and charging across a bridge under fire.
It's pure theater. I mean, he falls into a muddy ditch. His aide-de-camp gets killed protecting him. But the image of the general leading from the front, he spreads that image everywhere.
He's building his own brand.
He starts his own newspapers to tell the French people how great he is. He's not just winning battles, he's controlling the narrative.
Which leads to the wildest detour in his career. Egypt, 1798. He decides to invade Egypt to cut off Britain's trade route to India. Militarily, the notes say this was complicated.
Militarily, it ends up being a disaster. He wins on land. The Battle of the Pyramids is a slaughter because the Mamluks are charging with swords against modern French squares. But at sea, the British Admiral Nelson destroys the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile.
So he's trapped.
He's completely trapped in Egypt. His army is stuck there.
But culturally, it's a huge, weird win.
It is the birth of modern Egyptology. This is what sets Napoleon apart from a Genghis Khan or a Caesar. He brings 160 savants with him. Mathematicians, astronomers, biologists, artists.
They just catalog everything.
Everything. And they find the Rosetta Stone.
Which allows us to finally read hieroglyphs. It's an incredible discovery.
Exactly. So even though he eventually abandons his army in Egypt, a move that frankly should have had him court-martialed.
He just leaves them there.
Just leaves them. He sneaks back to France and spins the narrative so well that he's greeted as a hero, an exotic conqueror, and he returns just in time. The French government is collapsing, inflation is rampant, people are tired of the chaos.
And Napoleon looks at the situation and says, I can fix this.
The coup of 18 Brumaire, 1799. And it's not as smooth as the movies make it look. He actually gets flustered in the parliamentary chamber, almost faints, and gets shouted down.
Really?
Yeah. His brother Lucien has to save the day by getting the soldiers to clear the room. But the result is what matters. The Directory is dissolved. Napoleon becomes first consul.
And eventually, first consul for life. The Republic is effectively dead, even if they keep the name on the letterhead.
He is 30 years old, and he is the master of France.
So let's pause here, because usually history class focuses on the wars. But looking at the architect of modern France section of our notes, his biggest impact might actually be sitting on a bookshelf, not a battlefield.
I would argue yes. The Code Napoleon, the Napoleonic Code. You have to understand, before this, France was a legal nightmare.
Total mess.
In the South, they used Roman law. In the North, they used customary law. There were thousands of feudal exemptions. If you traveled across France, the laws changed every few miles.
So what did he do?
He sat down with legal experts and standardized it all. One set of laws for the entire country.
He established equality before the law. No more secret privileges for nobles.
Meritocracy codified. The idea that you get a job because you're good at it, not because your father was a duke. He also secularized the state. The church no longer controlled the civil records.
That all sounds very Enlightenment, very progressive. But we have to be balanced here. The sources point out some pretty dark sides to the code, specifically regarding women in the colonies.
We must be clear on this. The Napoleonic Code was a significant step backward for women's rights compared to the early days of the Revolution. It treated women as legal minors.
So they were basically the property of their husbands.
In many ways, yes. It codified the concept of puissance paternelle, the power of the father. A wife couldn't own property, couldn't sign a contract, couldn't work without her husband's permission.
And then there's the issue of slavery. The Revolution had abolished it in 1794.
And Napoleon brought it back. The law of 20 May 1802, he reinstated slavery in the French Caribbean colonies, mostly to boost the sugar economy.
Wow.
It led to the Haitian Revolution exploding, but the intent was clear. He was willing to sacrifice human rights for economic utility. It's a complex legacy. He's modernizing Europe's legal system with one hand and reinstating archaic oppression with the other.
It's that dual nature again. He's a builder. He creates the Bank of France to fix the currency. He creates the lycée school system to train administrators. He wants a state that runs like a machine.
He wants a legacy that outlasts him. He famously said, "Glory is fleeting, but obscurity is forever." He wanted to embed himself into the bedrock of Europe. And that ambition leads us inevitably to 1804.
The coronation. The moment he decides first consul isn't enough. He wants to be emperor.
And the scene at Notre Dame is just iconic. He invites the Pope all the way from Rome to legitimate him.
Right, to put the crown on his head.
But he refuses to be crowned by the Pope. At the crucial moment, he takes the crown and places it on his own head.
It's the ultimate power move. God didn't give me this, I took it.
Precisely. And then he crowns Josephine, who is kneeling before him. It's the peak of his glory. But now that he's emperor, the dynamic changes. The other monarchies of Europe, Britain and Austria, Russia, they can't accept this upstart on a throne.
And so the wars just keep escalating.
They do. And we have to talk about Austerlitz.
1805, the Battle of the Three Emperors. The sources describe this as his masterpiece. What makes it so special compared to his other wins?
It's a psychological victory as much as a military one. He's outnumbered by the combined Russian and Austrian forces. Most generals would dig in and defend.
But Napoleon does the opposite.
He creates an illusion. He intentionally weakens his right flank. He makes it look vulnerable, basically inviting the enemy to attack him there.
He's baiting the trap.
Exactly. The Allies see the weak flank. They think, we've got him, and they pour all their troops into that gap. But to do that, they have to abandon the high ground, the Pratzen Heights in the center.
Ah, okay.
And as soon as they move, Napoleon unleashes a hidden corps he had kept in reserve. They storm the heights, split the enemy army in two, and just roll them up. It was tactical perfection.
And the political fallout is massive. The Holy Roman Empire, which had existed for 1,000 years, is dissolved, gone.
He just erases it from the map. He creates the Confederation of the Rhine, a buffer state loyal to him. He is now the dominant power in Europe, and this is where he starts treating Europe like a family business.
Right, the House of Bonaparte.
He puts his brother Joseph on the throne of Spain, Louis in Holland, Jerome in Westphalia.
It's nepotism on a galactic scale.
Yeah.
But looking at the notes, this seems to be where the cracks start to form. His brothers aren't just puppets.
And that was his mistake. He expected them to be French viceroys. But Louis in Holland, for example, he realizes that Napoleon's policies are actually hurting the Dutch people.
So he starts to go native.
He starts siding with his subjects. He refuses to enforce conscription. Napoleon gets furious and eventually has to kick his own brother off the throne. It shows that you can conquer land, but you can't force loyalty even from your own family.
Speaking of family, the wives. This is a soap opera in itself.
It is the tragedy of the dynasty. Josephine was his true love. His early letters to her are incredibly passionate, filled with jealousy and longing. They're almost embarrassing to read.
But she couldn't give him an heir.
She was older and she couldn't. And for an emperor, an heir is everything. If he dies without a son, the empire he built just collapses.
So he divorces the woman he loves to marry. That's a teenager.
A Habsburg teenager. Marie-Louise, the daughter of the Austrian emperor, his old enemy. It was a cold political calculation. He wanted to mix his revolutionary blood with the oldest royal blood in Europe to make his dynasty legitimate.
And it worked. She gave him a son, the King of Rome, born in 1811.
Napoleon finally had his future secured. He called the boy the King of Rome. He was on top of the world. But this is where the Greek tragedy kicks in. Hubris.
The mistakes start piling up. The first one is the continental system.
Right. He can't defeat the British Navy. Nelson settled that at Trafalgar back in 1805. So Napoleon tries to fight an economic war. He forbids anyone in Europe from trading with Britain. He wants to bankrupt them.
Which sounds logical on paper. Starve them out.
But in practice, it was a disaster. Europe needed British goods, industrial textiles, coffee, sugar, tobacco. The blockade hurt the European economies more than it hurt Britain's.
So it just created resentment.
Widespread resentment. Smuggling was rampant. You had Russian aristocrats who couldn't get their coffee, and that breeds discontent that goes right to the top.
And then there's the Spanish ulcer.
He tries to force his brother Joseph onto the Spanish throne. The Spanish people revolt. But they don't fight a normal war. They fight a little war guerrilla.
Ambush tactic.
They ambush supply convoys, they kill stragglers. It turns into this bleeding wound that drains French money and soldiers for years. He committed hundreds of thousands of troops to hold down a country that didn't want him.
But the death blow is Russia. 1812. Why did he do it? Why invade Russia? It seems like the classic blunder that everyone knows not to do.
It was about the continental system. Russia had stopped complying. They were trading with Britain again. Napoleon felt he had to make an example of them to keep the rest of Europe in line.
So he gathers the Grande Armée.
Over 600,000 men, the largest European army ever assembled up to that point.
And we all know about General Winter, but the sources say the disaster started way before the snow fell.
Oh, long before. It was a logistics failure from day one. The army was too big to feed. The roads in Russia were just dirt tracks. Supply wagons couldn't keep up.
And disease, too, right?
Thousands died of typhus and dysentery in the summer heat. The water was bad. And the Russians used a scorched earth tactic. They retreated, burning crops, villages, and bridges as they went. Napoleon kept marching deeper, looking for that one decisive battle, but the Russians just kept pulling back.
And when he finally gets to Moscow?
It's a ghost town. And then it starts burning. The Russians set their own holy city on fire rather than let him have it.
Wow.
Napoleon sits in the Kremlin, watching the city burn, waiting for the Tsar to surrender. But the surrender never comes.
So he has no choice. He has to retreat.
And that retreat is one of the greatest horrors in human history. It's late October, the temperature plummets, men are freezing to death in their sleep, they are eating their own horses, they are under constant attack from Cossacks.
And the numbers are just staggering.
Of the more than 600,000 who went in, maybe 40,000 made it out in fighting shape. The Grande Armée was just gone.
And suddenly the sharks smell blood in the water.
Exactly. Prussia, Austria, Russia, Britain, they all join forces. They invade France. Napoleon fights brilliantly in 1814. The 6 Days Campaign is considered a tactical marvel, but he simply doesn't have the men left.
His own generals turn on him.
His marshals eventually refuse to fight. He is forced to abdicate.
And they send him to Elba, which, looking at the map, is remarkably close to Italy and France. It's a nice little Mediterranean island. He's allowed to be the Emperor of Elba.
It was a joke to him. He was 45 years old, a man of boundless energy, stuck playing mayor of a tiny island. I mean, he improved the roads, he fixed the sanitation, but he got bored. And he knew the French people weren't happy with the restored Bourbon king, Louis VIII, who was trying to turn back the clock.
So we get the 100 days. This is the part that feels like it's straight out of a movie script.
It's unbelievable. He escapes Elba, lands in France with a handful of guys, and starts marching to Paris.
And the king sends the 5th Regiment to arrest him.
They meet on a road near Grenoble. Napoleon has no weapons drawn. He walks out alone to meet the line of soldiers pointing muskets at him. He opens his coat and shouts, "If there is one among you who wishes to kill his emperor, here I am."
And they don't shoot.
They drop their muskets, they start weeping, and they shout, "Vive l'Empereur!" It shows the sheer magnetic charisma of the man. He retakes the throne without firing a single shot.
But the rest of Europe is not having it.
Not at all. They declare war not on France, but on Napoleon personally. They call him an enemy of humanity.
Which leads to Waterloo, 1815.
The final gamble. He faces Wellington and the Prussians in Belgium. It's a near-run thing, a very close battle, but he loses. It's over.
And this time, the British aren't taking any chances.
No, they aren't sending him to a nice Mediterranean resort. They send him to St. Helena.
Which sounds miserable. A rock in the middle of the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from anywhere.
It was a prison. He lived in Longwood House, which was damp, windswept, and infested with rats. The British governor, Hudson Lowe, was petty and paranoid, constantly checking to make sure Napoleon hadn't escaped.
But even there, he's still Napoleon. He's fighting one last campaign.
The campaign for history. He dictates his memoirs. He spins the narrative of his life. He portrays himself not as a failed conqueror, but as a martyr for liberty, a Prometheus chained to a rock.
Securing his legacy.
He knew that if he wrote the story, he could win the future, even if he lost the present.
And he reads a lot. The sources list his library. He's reading the Bible, the Quran, Homer. He's reflecting.
But his health was failing. There are theories about arsenic poisoning, which make for great TV. But the medical analysis suggests it was likely stomach cancer, the same thing that killed his father. He died in 1821.
His last words are haunting. France, the army, head of the army, Josephine.
It sums up his hierarchy of needs perfectly. His country, his power, and his lost love.
But there's one loose thread we need to pull on before we wrap up. The son, Napoleon II, the king of Rome. What happens to him?
This is the truly tragic epilogue to the whole story. When Napoleon fell in 1814, his wife Marie-Louise took their son back to Vienna to her father, the Austrian emperor. The boy was 3 years old. He never saw his father again.
That is heartbreaking.
The Austrians were terrified of him. They stripped him of his French identity. They took away his title King of Rome and made him the Duke of Reichstadt. They changed his name to Franz. They wouldn't let him speak French in court. They tried to turn him into a German prince.
Did he know who he was? Did he remember his father?
He did. He worshipped the memory of his father. He wanted to be a soldier, to live up to that name, but he was a prisoner of his own bloodline. The courts of Europe were terrified that if he ever returned to France, the empire would rise again. So he was kept in a gilded cage in Vienna.
And he dies young.
Tuberculosis. He died at age 21 in the same palace room where his father had once slept as a conqueror in Vienna. There is a poignant quote attributed to him near the end. "My birth and my death, that is my whole story."
Oof, that hurts. It really underscores that for all Napoleon's power, he couldn't protect the one thing he wanted most, his dynasty.
It brings us back to that central tension. Napoleon was a force of nature. He modernized Europe. The laws, the meritocracy, the very layout of Paris, his fingerprints are everywhere.
Right.
But the cost, millions of lives, decades of war, and a son who died alone and stripped of his identity.
It leaves us with a big question. Was he a hero of the Enlightenment who dragged Europe kicking and screaming into the modern age? Or was he just a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition has no brakes?
That is the question historians have been debating for 200 years. He is both the man who codified the law and the man who thought he was above it. He is the visionary and the tyrant.
A lot to think about. If you want to dive even deeper into the stories that shaped our world, make sure you are subscribed to the History Titans channel. Like this deep dive, share it with a friend who needs to know why the map of Europe looks the way it does, and let us know what you think, visionary or tyrant.
Or perhaps, inevitably, both.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.